With Core 3 of the Thousand Year Blood War anime ending recently, I decided that it'd be fun to talk about Bleach again. However, instead of talking about the recent core, I figured I'd revisit the movies and do a little rank and review of them because why not? Before I start the video properly though, I want to make it clear that this ranking is based purely on my personal opinion. I'm not going to try to act like one film is inherently better than the other because, well, none of these films are perfect. Also, in addition to the 4 anime movies, I will also be including the live action film as well, making this a list of 5 rather than 4. So now, without further ado, let's get started. Kicking things off at number 5 is Bleach Movie 2, The Diamond Dust Rebellion. No matter how many times I've watched this one, I just can't get into it that much. While it's a pretty decent movie with cool action and a somewhat interesting storyline, the thing that keeps me from getting fully invested is the fact that the character at the center of this movie is simply not one of my favorites. Now, I happen to actually like Hitsugaya, but I've never found him to be that interesting, so a movie focusing mostly on him is just not for me. Luckily though, the other characters do get some time to shine during the film, and they're all used fairly well for the most part. Despite his inclusion feeling a teeny bit forced, Ichigo's role here, as the one who helps Toshiro realize that he needs to rely on his friends more instead of keeping to himself all the time, works. There isn't much to say about Rukia, Renji, Rangiku, or the other captains, but they all play a role in helping Hitsugaya out towards the end. And as for the main villain, Kusaka, he's fine enough. I don't think he's that compelling, but even so, I do feel bad for the guy. He got royally screwed over by the Central 46, and it resulted in his death. He has every right in the world to be pissed, but once again, as villains tend to do, he took things too far. Outside of the characters, as I said before, the action's pretty good. I mean, I wouldn't rank any of these fights among my favorites in the series, but they're fun to watch, I guess. So yeah, this one is pretty good. It just doesn't hold my attention the way the others do. At number 4 is the 2018 live-action film simply titled Bleach. I actually watched this one for the first time ever for this video, and I have to say that this was better than I expected it to be. While it's not a great film, it is rather enjoyable and I did have a good time watching it. The film does a nice job of translating Bleach's first arc into live action, adapting it faithfully while also making necessary changes and cuts in order to fit the near 2-hour runtime. And most of the changes are fine. Grand Fisher being the main villain works, and while I do miss Orihime and Chad's storylines from the manga, cutting them out for runtime purposes makes sense. In all honesty, I have no real issues with this film aside from a few negatives that are arguably more nitpicks than anything else. For example, I really missed the humor. I understand that the humor from the manga likely wouldn't translate that well into live action, but I can't help it. I missed Goofy Ishin and even some of Kone's nonsense. Granted, this movie does have funny moments, but still. Also, I don't love the extra scenes with Renji and Byakuya throughout. Now, none of these scenes are terrible per se, but they don't really add anything to the story. Not to mention that all the scenes really do is make Byakuya and Renji look even more villainous than they already did during their introduction in the manga and anime. One final negative is related to the pacing. The pacing is fine for the most part, but it did start to drag around the middle section of the film. Luckily though, it did pick back up once the final fight with Grand Fisher started, which was really cool, by the way. But that's basically all I have to say about this one. If you're a Bleach fan and you haven't seen this film, I'd recommend giving it a watch at least once. At number 3 is Bleach Movie 3, Fade to Black. Going into this, I was honestly expecting to put this one at number 2 because at one point in time, this was my second favorite of the movies. However, my opinion of it has changed some. While it's still a good movie and I enjoy it a lot, I just don't love it as much as I used to. Now, why that is, I don't know. I have no explanation other than that my opinion simply changed over time. But, anyways, to talk about the movie itself, the best part of this one is its premise, and that alone does a lot to keep me invested in the story. The concept of Rukia's and everyone else's memories being erased, with Ichigo being the only one to remember Rukia, is a cool idea. I also like how they also had everyone's memories of Ichigo himself be erased, since without Rukia, no one in the Gote would have ever met Ichigo. It ends up adding some nice extra tension to the story. It's also nice how this movie puts some focus on Rukia and her friendships. Now, due to him being the only one to remember her, Ichigo gets the most attention, but I appreciate that this movie doesn't push Renji or Byakuya off to the side, and speaking of which, this movie uses Renji and Byakuya well. They're both very in character here, with Renji being his usual hothead self while Byakuya tries to figure things out on his own. All in all, there's only really one negative to the movie, and that is the siblings. Despite being the arguably most sympathetic movie villains, they're still not compelling. It also doesn't help that the sister especially is quite annoying. I mean, I get why she behaves the way that she does. What happened to her and her brother was tragic, and considering that the one who attacked them was a Soul Reaper, I can't see why she hates them so much. I can't help it, though. I still find her extremely annoying, and that will likely never change. But that's all I've really got to say about this one. At number 2 is the final Bleach anime movie, Hellverse. This one being at number 2 is kind of funny to me, mainly because I used to not really like this movie. Now, why I didn't like it, I don't remember. But as you can see, I've warmed up to it quite a bit. Of the 4, this one is probably the most interesting since it explores a part of Bleach's world that has yet to be explored in the manga. This is definitely a huge reason as to why I was intrigued by this movie before I ever watched it, because I was curious as to what Bleach's version of this realm would be, and I was not disappointed. I absolutely love the look of hell in this movie. It's really cool how different each level looks. Like, the first couple we see look fairly normal, but the deeper it goes, the more hellish it looks. Now, I don't know how much input Kubo had in creating the look of hell, and I imagine that if he ever does write that arc, that his version will be different. But for what we've got right now, it's great and fits pretty well within the world of Bleach. Aside from that, this movie also has great action. Of all of the movie fights, the ones from Hellverse are the only ones that I find somewhat memorable. And that's basically all of the praise that I can give this movie because narratively, it isn't the strongest. The plot is a bit messy, plus it's really just Ichigo having to once again save someone he cares about, which is the plotline for basically all of these films, but that doesn't bother me too much. Honestly though, the only real problem with Hellverse is its villain. Of all the movie villains, Kokuto might be the weakest of the bunch. He's just not all that well written, and his motivation is pretty weak. They do try to give him a more sympathetic angle, but it doesn't work because even with his backstory, he's still an asshole, and I don't like him. Also, despite the writer's best attempt to make him seem like a good guy early on, it was still blatantly obvious that this guy couldn't be trusted, so when the reveal comes, I'm not surprised one bit. Thankfully though, that's the only real weak part of this movie. Outside of that, it's a damn good time and I enjoy it despite its flaws. And finally, at number 1 is none other than Memories of Nobody, the very first Bleach movie. As soon as I had the idea for this video, I knew that this one was going to be number 1, because I've loved this movie ever since I first watched it, and at no point has it ever not been my favorite of the movies. Now, I'm not going to claim that this movie is perfect, because it's not. The villains are pretty bland, and to be honest, I don't love the final section of the movie that much. While it's cool that everyone comes to the Valley of Screams to help Ichigo out, I just don't find any of the fights to be that exciting. Thankfully though, the ending is strong enough that it ends up not bothering me too much. It also helps that basically everything else about this movie is very good. It's well paced, the music is great, and the action is pretty good for the most part. And plot wise, this one might be the most coherent. I mean, an argument can be made for Fade to Black holding that title, but I personally would give it to this one. Memories of Nobody is also probably the most emotional of the movies. Now, the others do have emotional moments, of course, but I don't know. This one just hits differently. Like, I swear, that final scene with Ichigo and Senna never fails to make me so sad, and actually made me cry on my first watch, and still kinda does, not gonna lie. And of course, I cannot talk about this movie without mentioning Senna. I just love this character. Of all the movie original characters, she is definitely the most endearing, and what really helps is that the audience gets to know and understand her during the early part of the story. This way, by the time the reveal of her true nature comes about, we care about her and are rooting for her rescue. It also makes her ending way sadder than it would have been otherwise. And I really could just go on and on about this movie, but I'm gonna have to stop it here so I don't start rambling too much. All in all, though, Memories of Nobody is an awesome movie and it's my favorite of them all. And with that, I am done talking about all of the Bleach movies. This one was a lot of fun. Not only did I get to re-watch movies I enjoy, but I also got to make this video for you all. And let me tell you, it felt really nice to work on a video again after my over a month-long break. But I'm done talking now, so I'll wrap this up by saying that I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, that's great. But if not, well, thanks for taking the time to listen to my nonsense. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll hopefully see you next time. Goodbye!